Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the四海为学collaborative learning project is based. I want to welcome you today to our sixth roundtable and our 30th event of the四海为学collaborative learning project. Today, we've invited speakers to discuss irony in the Analects. We have a really nice group of speakers here to participate at this roundtable. They include Professor Huaiyu Wang from Georgia College and State University, Professor Dimitra Amarantidou from the University of Macau, and Professor Brook Ziporyn from the University of Chicago. We also have Dr. Takaharu Oda from the Southern University of Science and Technology in Shenzhen, here to be our chair, and he is invited, of course, to jump in and participate wherever he sees fit. So the roundtable will be 2 hours total, ending promptly at 11 a.m. Beijing time. The structure of our roundtable is as follows. Professor Wang will present his view for 10 to 15 minutes, and then have a discussion with the other two participants for 15 minutes total. Professor Amarantidou will discuss her view for 10 or 15 minutes and then have a 15-minute discussion. And then Professor Ziporyn, again, will present his view for 10 to 15 minutes and then have a 15-minute discussion with the other two participants. This should leave us with about 30 minutes, probably a little bit less, time for questions and comments from the audience. Before getting things started and handing things over to Dr. Oda, I want to say a few things about the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Academic Forum. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and look at me, I'm smarter than you, or don't I know so much, and similar types of attitudes that happen sometimes in academic exchange. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchange by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where people truly learn from and with one another. Before introducing our chair, I want to once again thank Professors Huaiyu, Dimitra Amarantidou, and Brook Ziporyn for their time. I know Dimitra and Brook pretty well, and it's great to be able to host a discussion with them. And Professor Wang comes on such high recommendations and has participated in events before. So although I don't know him very well, we're very happy to have him here. And I don't envy that he might have to perhaps sometimes reel in some of the craziness of Dimitra and particularly of Brook. So luckily, again, it's not my job to keep those two in check. Our chair today is Dr. Takaharu Oda from the Southern University of Science and Technology in Shenzhen. Dr. Takaharu Oda is a junior fellow at the Society of Fellows in the Liberal Arts at the Southern University of Science and Technology. In 2022, he received a PhD in philosophy from Trinity College in Dublin. Whilst he was developing his PhD thesis, A Pragmatic Bishop, George Berkeley's Theory of Causation in Dimitra, for a monograph. His interests also lie in comparative and post-comparative philosophy, particularly between Asia and pragmatism, and he is co-founder of the Asia Pragmatism Network. He has a forthcoming paper in the journal Logica Universalis, which is on Shenzhou's roots in Taoism. Thank you very much, Dr. Oda. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for a kind introduction from Professor D'Ambrosio. I'm very honored and privileged to host and chair this session, Roundtable. The first speaker, Professor Huaiyu Wang, let me introduce first. And then each of you will be introduced Yeah, and I will inform you, Professor Wang, after 15 minutes or so. If it's long, I will interrupt. Okay, so let me introduce. Professor Wang Huaiyu received his BA from Fudan University and his PhD in philosophy from the Pennsylvania State University in 2006. He is currently professor of philosophy at Georgia College and State University. He served as the former president of the Association of Chinese Philosophers in America. Professor Wang's areas of specializations are Chinese and comparative philosophy and contemporary continental philosophy. His recent works focus on early Confucian teachings and their significance for modern societies. Professor Wang has numerous publications in leading journals and is currently working on a new study and translation of the great treatise of the I Ching. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Let me try to share my screen. See. Okay. Okay. Yeah. This is my presentation. It's nice to meet you, and thank you for having me here. So let me start with some introduction on the irony in Analects. Well, the first slide, let me see. There's a way to put this. Okay. 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 Let's look at the for the Analects 318 to start with, and the math said the full observance of the rules of propriety in serving one's prince is accounted by people to be flattering. There are two ways of reading this. If we read what we call it propositional reading, if you observe the rules of propriety fully, then people will take you to be flattering. Then the logical conclusion that you should not do so to avoid the negative conception of others. Indeed, you see some scholars interpret this passages this way. But if you read between the lines, it should be, we can read it as it is ironic that when I serve the prince with full observance of propriety, people take me to be flattering. Then I should do so nevertheless, because it is the right thing to do. So you see that the meaning of the passage is actually opposite when the words are taken literally or with a sense of irony. So that's very interesting. So there are two contrary ways of reading and interpretation. And one is to take as authoritative instruction of a sage with moral perfection and a godly figure who knows all and who dictates to others what is the right thing to do. The other is a way to read the Analects as an intimate and personal exchange between the master and his disciples and others with humor and irony, oftentimes. And that is the Lin Yutang's argument or views. He says that one can arrive at a true appreciation of the beauty of Confucius' character only through his humor, the merry, kindly humor of resignation. And many of the sayings, according to Lin, recorded in the Analects can only be properly understood in the nature of light humorous remarks between him and his intimate disciples. So, for example, we can look at again another line in Analects 5:11. Zigong said, "When I do not want others imposed upon me, I also do not want to impose upon others." The master said, "This is not what you can attain." So if we take this literally as a propositional reading, suggested by some analytic philosophers, the master here is determining that Zigong was incapable of acting according to the golden rule. So that's a negative evaluation of Zigong's ability and discouragement for his moral progress. But if we want to read it with understanding of light humor and irony, as suggested by Lin Yutang, we can see here actually a gentle disapproval of Zigong's assertive attitude, and we can find possible implications may include, like the master word suggested, do you know how hard it is to follow the golden rule truthfully? Or don't we always want to impose more on others and want nothing imposed upon us by others? Or why don't you start doing this first before you make such a high claim? And may even include I myself have tried to do this for long, but only with limited success. And it is really hard to do. And I myself, how can you attend just by saying this? So these are some of the kind of implications that I think if we read this more carefully. Of course, there are more if we explore, and I would like to hear more from you if you have anything to say about this. And again, if we look at the very controversial Analects line in 1318, it's a very heatedly debated passage about Confucius' response to Duke Shi about the so-called upright Gong, who reported on his own father for stealing goats from their neighborhood. Those who are up, and Confucius responded, those who are upright among my clan are different from this. Fathers cover up for their sons, and sons cover up for their fathers. Zhi, translated as upright, and whose meaning is actually straight, forthright, upright, is to be found in this. Now, many scholars have, both Chinese and Western scholars, contemporary scholars, have taken this to be a directive of an authoritative master, and as the unswerving loyalty for one's parents, and which Bernard Russell has taken it to prevent the growth of public spirit, and as a supreme authority of a single definite cosmic order, that the problem of genuine choice among real alternatives never occurred to Confucius. That's Finger's view. But I think we can also take this as, if we take a response to an authoritative lord. Actually, Confucius actually here was having interview with Duke Shi, who is the lord of the true, and he was trying to seek employment, actually. It's almost like a job interview and the like, but he was trying to respond with a light humor and irony, and to play with the double meanings of the word, which means straight, upright, and forthright. And so he was maybe suggesting that while the fathers and sons might not be upright in covering up each other, they were forthright in expressing their genuine emotions of family love. So that would be maybe more interesting to find the hidden implications. So in general, I would think that it will be interesting to explore what Lin Yutang put in his famous book called The Importance of Living, introduced this very interesting idea of the scamp or vagabond as the ideal of human dignity, which draws upon ancient Chinese philosophers. And he argued that this scamp ideal is really the hope of modern civilization, and inspired from the Chinese philosophers who dream with one eye open and views life with love and sweet irony, and who mix cynicism with a kindly tolerance. So if we study this idea of scamp, so scamp is, I taught this with my students many years, and so it's interesting to know that scamp is a Rome. If we check the Oxford English Dictionary, we find definition that scamp is a rogue, a wanderer, a playful and mischievous person who is benign and civil in his manners. For example, a traditional usage including a highway robber who robs rich persons without harming them. Some figures like Voltaire, the French philosopher, called a scam sometimes. And it's a word of mild reproof, playful character, a good for nothing, worthless person, a rascal. So it's overall negative. It's intriguing that Ling Yutang was kind of having a high claim about this kind of scamp ideal as the hope of modern civilization. And I think that's a very interesting argument that he made. But I would think that one interesting way to understand this is that if we use this scamp ideal for Analects 1318, and you can see that maybe the Confucius did not certify the covering up actions of the fathers and the sons as an upright moral paragraphs. They were more like the scamps who leave one eye open and one eye closed. In Chinese, we call it 睁一只眼闭一只眼, as a cunning solution to a tricky and paradoxical situation. And so this really invites us to rethink about the relationship between the scamps and the sages. I think the one thing in common between the scamps and sages are that they both choose to abide by their true nature against the dogmas and human humbugs of the day. The scamps may challenge authorities with mischievous defiance, while the sages criticize and transform the mendacious social and political order and the structure with cultivation and preservation of our true nature. So if we take the Confucian sage as a virtuoso of the art of life, with one kind of reading of the Confucian teachings. And the Confucian sage is not contrary to the idea of scam. He may kind of often tolerate, approve, or even personify this scamp idea. And Confucius' ready confirmation of his own crestfallen look as a homeless wandering dog. It's like in Sima Qian's biography of Confucius, and recorded this kind of conversation between Confucius and his disciple when Confucius affirms his own look as a homeless wandering dog at a vague pond. And as was in Chinese called 丧家狗, and in his vagabond years, and it's much more like I think Confucius himself may be regarded as scamp by some social and political authorities in his day, and so that's a way to appreciate the human irony in the Analects. May revise a conventional conception of Confucius as a saint or sage with an authoritative figure with moral perfection and call-like knowledge and capacity to tell everyone what is the right thing to do. But the truth is that, as Sima Qian pointed out, Confucius was actually a common person with no rank in his day, and it's what Chinese called 布衣, and acclaimed as a supreme. Sima Qian did acclaimed Confucius as a sage, and included Confucius' biography into the so-called 世家. 世家 actually means that he has a legacy that has a kind of have someone who has a kind of legacy passed down for generations, and usually that's the royal families. But Confucius was included as one, although he had no rank, but his legacy actually was kind of passed down because he carried on the royal teachings, I think. So the appreciation of his superb ability to maintain peace, grace, and good humor, to hold on to his. I think he's more like a figure who hold on to his true nature and teachings of benevolence and justice, despite all the failures and the vagabond destiny in an imperfect world. And that's he's more like sometimes more like a stamps and authoritative figures are reading. So that may be, I will stop here and see what you think about this. See how to, let me, how to stop sharing.
Or just click again above.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Right. Thanks, Professor Wang. I'd like to start the Q&A session from the speakers, and then final session from the floor will be after Professor Ziporyn's talks. So I will ask Professor Amarantidou and then Professor Ziporyn, respectively. Any questions from Dimitra?
Yes, thank you, Professor Wang. So many questions you raise. Yeah, I don't know where to start really. Let me start with this tension, with this implied tension that I see in your presentation, which is the tension between accepting sageliness and irony, like in the same breath. That somehow irony and humor and sageliness are not compatible. We find this in the readings, and even in Lin Yutang, who somehow emphasizes this, let's say, guy next door kind of Confucius, the person who is fallible, the person who is not perfect, yeah, there is first of all this kind of tension, and I'm wondering if we can think somehow beyond that, if we can understand sageliness and even perfection differently in a way that includes basically being aware of your own shortcomings, being aware of the shortcomings of others, and dealing with them with this kind of tolerant irony that Lin is talking about. So yeah, my first thought is this: if we can somehow think beyond this tension, which somehow makes it inconceivable that a sage would have the leisure to play with words, right? Because irony is a kind of play with words. So this is one point, and the other point is, I hope I can expand on this a bit later. The other point is whether we can think about irony beyond the utterance level, beyond the sentence level. In these examples, which yes, I also use these examples where Confucius is saying something and then means something else, or even means the opposite of what he says. Yeah, we seem to have like a very kind of a basic form of irony, right? Like the irony that we know also from the Western tradition, the irony that pertains to language. It's tied up with language, right? And utterances. So yeah, my question would be, what would be the implication of accepting that there is this kind of irony, the irony on the purely like linguistic level? Like he says something, he means something else, or he means even the opposite, right? So what would be the implication of this kind of irony? Does this kind of irony somehow beget another kind of irony, which is more, how can I can say, more corrosive, or more, even more dizzying, yeah, at some moments. So yeah, these are my points for the time being from your yes, very, very inspiring talk.
Thank you very much for a generous comment. And I think irony is really a very important philosophical topic, and largely downplayed or ignored in contemporary study of Confucius and other important Chinese figures, and it should be paid more attention. My opinion is that there is not only, of course, contemporary scholars, the Jesuit translation of the Confucius work and his character using the hand or sage, but also it is also a traditional Chinese way of reading into one, and of course, as a sage, whereas especially in the later kind of dynasty, that's income. But in early days, important to read Confucius as a real character, and that I think, and Mencius also says that the sage is not somebody who never made mistakes, right? The sage is not perfect, and so it's no way of kind of way of reading is that is kind of can.
There is some problem with the audio. I'm sorry, Professor
Yeah,
Wang.
the
Really?
connection is not
Yes.
really
Can you hear me better
Yeah.
now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, let me coming closer to the microphone
It's
so
much
that
better.
you don't lose me. I'm sorry. And so yeah, so my view is that Confucius is not kind of the sage that is kind of presented both by the Jesuits and some Western scholars and by some later Confucians. And he was more like a person. If we read carefully his words and his character in his conversation, and he was more like Mencius may not take him to be a sage like this, right? And he's more like who has somebody who a personality who had rather failed in his life to present his idea, and he went around to find someone who can really appreciate him. And in his conversation with his kind of disciples, he often suggests that I'm wandering, and this wandering character of Confucius is actually I would think rethink about how a true character oftentimes behave like this. It's even you think about the true Confucians in Chinese history, like even like Zhu Xi and who actually who often only played very little roles in public life and quit very quickly when they have to wander with their kind of truthful kind of ideas. That's itself an irony, I think. That's the irony of life. And the irony of words, of course, can come from an irony within life itself that I think is a more philosophical investigation. I think my presentation can be an introduction, kind of reflection and conversation for this purpose. Hopefully,
All right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's keep this talk after the final talk. But we need to move on to Professor Ziporyn's question, if you have.
Sure. Yeah, great. And Huaiyu, nice to see you again. Yes, I really enjoyed that, and I'm glad that we're going to try to pursue, maybe calibrate a little exactly what we mean by irony or the kind of irony that might apply in the Analects. I do think it's a great opportunity to kind of refine the concept, because that I think in both Dimitra and I've seen some of what you're going to present and some of the things I'm going to talk about. We will be expanding on this and trying to maybe get a modified definition of that term. I have one quick question about 1318 as you discuss it. And I of course, really like this. The question is, just to clarify, I take it that you are citing that the claims that this somehow the representative that, for example, Rosemount's claim that a real alternative never occurs to Confucius, or that there's some kind of what did you say, single cosmic order. That this.
That's interesting.
I may have missed what you said there, but I'm assuming you are citing those passages not as comments about this passage, but as things which this passage contravenes, right? Because on the face of it, what's going on, in this passage is not is exactly the opposite, right? That I take it was your intent, right? Because Confucius is not saying that a father and a son who shield each other are the only form of zhi, right? He says, zhi yi zai qi zhong, right? So, or
But,
zhi zai.
but that's the Fingerist view that this passage and is indicating an authoritative instruction,
Right,
and
which seems patently insane, right?
Mhm.
Right, because he's literally, and I think this is what I really appreciated there, that you are playing on not the denial of the other sense of zhi, but an inherent doubleness in the very idea of zhi, right? So
Yes.
there's an internal tension in zhi, which we can translate in two kind of alternate ways, right?
Yes.
Uprightness, or what was your other
Forthright.
forthrightness, right? And the conflict or the tension is right there in the very thing, and maybe that's kind of what you mean by irony of life, right? That's inescapable.
Yes.
And he's pointing out the other end, and I'm going to talk a little about that liang duan kind of idea, that are there in the center of the word. So, you're pulling back to the center when you hit the other end of the meaning of the word. And maybe we can factor that in somewhere as we try to understand what irony means in the Analects. So that's first thing. Second thing, I really like what you very slyly said. Confucius maybe will tolerate, approve, or even personify the scamp, right? And those are very different. The personify, you cited the Sima Qian characterization and some of that image of Confucius in his failure. But I wonder if you would also consider that Confucius's behavior, even in that passage in 1318, is scampish. In other words, that way of responding is not as an instruction, but as a bit of, daoluan to the preconceptions of the speaker, and saying something that's deliberately a provocative and troublemaking. Right?
Yeah.
That would be to, on the one hand, approve of the scampish behavior of those who protect their parents through deception, but it would also be personifying that ideal himself in answering that question and pivoting it on that sort of pun around the word zhi.
Yeah, I think that's very, very nice question. Yeah, I think that's the case. Let me get that first, and then back to the first question. And
I have
so,
one more if I have time.
okay, yeah. So our audience about our questions.
My last one before you answer that, because it's kind of connected, it goes back to 511, your first example, right? Now, this is a wild surmise, and this, I just don't want Paul to be disappointed that I won't say anything very crazy. So I will say this. It occurred to me as you were talking about that, fei er suo ji, right, is what Confucius says there. It is not something you can reach. So I'm going to propose a sort of preposterous possibility about reading that. How about if you were to read that response as saying, okay, he says, what I don't want done to me, I don't want to make happen to other people. And Confucius says, that's not something you reach. Okay, literally, right? You don't reach it. Could this be something like, I know Dimitra's going to talk about the 再可以 passage, right? Where somebody says, everything before I act, I think 3 times, and Confucius says, twice is enough. So one of these examples where he's saying someone is being overzealous in applying a virtue. But in this case, it would be to say, look, you can't control how other people are going to be affected by you. So it's fei er so ji, right? So it's undermining the golden rule itself as a moral principle, but it's also exemplifying it. Why? Because in Confucius, stopping his disciple from sort of beating himself up for failing to do this, he is doing to him what he is not having to him happen what he doesn't want to happen to himself. See what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
Just
yeah,
an idea.
That's right. Thank you very much for the provocative question. And, let me dwell first on the statutory thing. Yeah, if time
Again, the
allows.
connection is not.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's the case that I think you understand the context of the conversation is that Duke Shi is a lord, that very authoritative figure.
Right.
in order, and he cited this passage probably we want to find in Chinese history and that dimension of authoritative authority, and especially legalists would like to have this kind of reporting their published.
Right.
So there's always a tension about state control, and this state control sometimes is attributed, and that's what I have most problem with. Right? And the Confucius basic position is not to affirm this kind of state control. And that's why in his conversation he playing with these words and as a gentle disapproval, maybe about the authority kind of the position on this. So this is my reading of it. And of course, there's a reverent aspect of Confucius. We don't want to downplay that. Confucius is respect for authority, reverent, and but this image, this dimension of Confucius' character and teaching has to be with another kind of dimension about meaning. So that's what I appreciate very much that you clarify further about this kind of thing. And there are multiple layers of meaning in many conversations, not only this one, but in many conversations and in many settings in our life, right? And so that Confucius is just kind of, in a way, personify. I agree that he personified a scam, not really like a kind of like the Taoist figure, like a more kind of within the appropriate social settings, play with some words that can reveal some kind of ulterior kind of meaning and ulterior kind of to let the person reflect on it. Of course, you see that the Lord Shi did not employ Confucius, not use him in the end. He probably don't like the message, but that's the point. That to be a Confucian is not to be necessarily employed by the authorities, but like a Socrates role, right? And so it's called a 次, right? And so it's not making you too comfortable about things, and that's the purpose. But also not a direct confrontation. So this is a balance, I think, that people sometimes tend to miss in Confucius kind of conversations and words, and I hope to call back. I don't want to take too long so that I can get the floor to Dimitri and hear that. So we can keep talking about maybe, that's a nice point about 511, but for time I will stop here and we can catch up with that. Yeah.
Can I follow up with a question? Takaharu,
yes,
is it
yes,
okay?
yes. This is your time, actually, yeah.
Yes, Professor Wang, I was wondering if, because, the moment you start talking about the scamp and the vagabond, I'm thinking of the other reading, which your reading, which I have found, which has been quite influential for me, which is the reading of irony as an expression of deferral, as moral discretion, like connecting irony and Kongzi's ironic remark to Chen, to basically opening up a space for reflection for his interlocutor. Not really like making some definite statement, but opening up the space for them to reflect. And I wonder if this reading can be compatible with the scamp reading, and how the scamp somehow is at the same time this person who is deferring to others, who is not right, who is not imposing a certain, let's say, interpretation, respecting others, right? Like the gentlemanly scamp somehow, or the respectful scamp, let's say. You know, how would you combine these two ideas? I'm very curious.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I think there are many different kind of scams, right? And there are some scams that simply escape their responsibilities, and I don't think that Confucius is this kind of scam, and that's the intent. But there are multiple dimensions in your character, and I think Ling is that right that he used the scam because human beings evolved from and monkeys are scamps. So there is a within the nature of human beings this kind of, and I think Confucius do not want to teach you to be a rigid kind of conformer to rules, so that you lose completely your true nature as a monkey, who, from where you evolve from. But you want to be true to yourself, and yet at the same time, and you want to balance yourself to the situations and find appropriateness. That's sometimes different between the Confucian Taoists. The Taoists sometimes want to be more radical scamps, right? Confucius want to be find you that you don't want to be lose your true nature, but also want you to be appropriate to many social situations. So that's the balance, I think, that we can think more about how he play with the words and how many passages can mean so many different things in different settings and contexts. Hope this answer your question.
All right, let's move on to Dimitra's talk. The second speaker, Professor Dimitra Amarantidou, in her name in Chinese, Yi Donglan, I hope it's right, was born and raised in Athens, Greece. She was taught Chinese and comparative philosophy at East China Normal University, Shanghai Normal University, and other institutions, and currently teaches Chinese and comparative philosophy at the University of Macau. Her research focuses on irony and paradox in early Chinese thoughts, and particularly in Confucianism. Her publications include The Irony of Confucius, Philosophy Compass, The Riddle as Key, Irony and Paradox in 4 Contemporary Readings of Taoism, The Bad Confucius, Unappealing Lessons from Confucian Morality, again from Philosophy Compass, and others. She works both individually and collaboratively on translations of contemporary Chinese philosophical works. She is also fellow and teacher of the Center for Intercultural Learning at ECNU, and co-editor of the book reviews China Southeast Asia section for Philosophy East and West. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Takaharu. Let me share my screen.
Yes, please.
Here. Is it okay?
Yes, very good.
Yes. Okay, so Yes, inevitably, when we talk about irony, we somehow connect it to the figure of Confucius. So a certain kind of Confucius is somehow the assumption that only a certain kind of Confucius is possible of using irony. So yes, so the problem of the figure of Confucius is there, which Confucius we're considering when we're talking about irony. Or, of course, the question could also be if, no matter what Confucius we're thinking about, whether it is the Confucius of the Neo-Confucians that Ling Yutang so much is not very happy with, and whether it is the Confucius of Ling Yutang himself or the Confucius of to mention another seminal work, right? To mention Christoph Habsmeyer's Confucius, who is very much a continuation of Ling Yutang's Confucius. So, along with this question, also comes the question about the true Confucius. This is also something that is implied there, that there is a true Confucius who is like this, and that he is using irony and he's using humor, and that he's not like that. So this is also an assumption. And it seems like, it seems that, yes, in the tradition, we can say that if he is the one, he cannot be the other. If he's a sage, he cannot be ironic. If he's ironic, he cannot be a sage. And yes, my question that I posed in the beginning, whether we can imagine these two things coexisting, and how sageliness changes, the meaning of sageliness changes once we insert irony into the mix, and how irony, of course, to go back to Brook's point, which I think is a very important question, how irony itself needs to be redefined when it comes into contact with this kind of sageliness, a Confucian kind of sageliness. So, yes, can we say that Confucian irony is a sui generis irony? And what kind of irony would that be? How do we define it? So, yeah, one way to go about doing that, at least for me, even though, yeah, I cannot say that it works perfectly for me right now or still, but anyway, yeah, it is a way to go about thinking about irony as, first of all, irony in a narrow sense, as verbal irony, like I said previously, where Confucius says one thing and he means another, or he means the opposite. So 3 times or several times, yes, you don't have to think so much. 2 times is fine. Whereas where he's basically saying, we might say he's saying the opposite, that is, he's talking about morality and about moral cultivation, not in terms of, let's say, a fixed rule or a recipe, not in terms of number of times. And it is a kind of indirect critique towards this kind of attitude. And then, yes, another case of this kind of irony again, which is on the level of the utterance, on the sentence level, let's say. Kongzi said, "Nobody walks the way. I'll get on a raft and float on the seas. I'm sure Yo would follow me, wouldn't he?" This is a very free translation that I did based on other translations too. Zilu was very happy to hear this, and Kongzi said, "Surely Yo has more courage than me, but there is no material to make the boat." So here we have Zheng Xuan, the commentator, the very influential commentator who strangely somehow was influenced later commentaries, but but his own main idea was somehow forgotten or did not prevail in the interpretations. So his understanding is that because Tzu did not understand his subtle language, Confucius is teasing him. So Zheng Xuan gives us the material to challenge this image of Confucius as the immaculate sage, challenges previous hagiographies, and paints an unorthodox portrait of Confucius as someone who could transmit wisdom, yet was aware of his own lack of wisdom, as well as of that of others. And he offers two different glosses. Confucius means the opposite of what he says. So yes, that's how we could see this as a case of verbal irony. He has no intention of taking to the seas on a raft. And Tzu does not understand this, and the master makes fun of him. Or he did mean what he said, but regrets Tzu's pride and therefore takes back his words. In both cases, Confucius is somebody who is playing with words, and somebody who is somebody who is basically, yes, aware of others' shortcomings, and and there might even be an implication there, like Professor Wang mentioned, that he's also being self-critical in this way, that he's also pointing out the fact that he's not really capable of doing something like this, or he's a failure, not managing to make some to effect great changes, let's say. So again, still, if we take irony to be in this narrow sense, it could also be seen as Huaiyu, as indirect communication, as Kongzi's subtle words, as they came to be understood in the tradition. So yeah, this also poses the question for me, which is, not maybe not my question, but it is a question that I have had to seriously take into consideration, because it comes from Chinese scholars that I have talked about this topic with. So their argument is, why call it irony? Why not just call it Huaiyu? This is just his indirect way of communication, and it is his tool of instruction. It has this pedagogical function, and it is also a language which is for a certain group of people, and it's not a language that everybody is supposed to understand. So to go back to Zheng Xuan's reading, in either case, whether we read it as Confucius saying that he is going, but Tzu is not good enough, or he's not going and Tzu is taking it seriously, he's portrayed as the teacher who fails to live up to his own teaching about being cautious with words. And Zheng Xuan admires the master for his attentiveness to classical texts and for transmitting the sagely words of others, but in this way he calls the sageliness into question. So yes, he uses Huaiyu, he uses this expression, and which is also, of course, we find this recognized by other commentators. In ancient times, Confucius talked subtly, and his disciples noted this down. So it is a kind of irony. It is the irony, for example, that the Roman tradition, the Roman orators and philosophers of education like Cicero and Quintilian, it is the irony that they recognized in Socrates, the irony which is meant to be understood. It's not meant to trick. This is the irony they recognized. This is the only kind of irony they accepted for Socrates, or the wise Socrates. So it is, let's say, it is close to this kind of understanding that irony is a subtle way of talking an indirect communication, but it is meant to be understood by those select few. And of course, Lin Yutang, who takes it a little bit further, takes this irony, takes up the philosophical implications of understanding Confucius as the human Confucius, as this fallible man who is like us somehow. So irony becomes this philosophical stance, as Professor Wang also discussed. And he connects this also to Qingli, to reasonableness, which is opposed to rationality. And the Qingli is rooted in common sense and is manifest in Kongzi's tolerant irony towards people's vices. And yeah, an example of Qingli that I really like from Lin Yutang is from his story on his essay, his short essay on vegetarians. There are vegetarians and vegetarians, and he says that there are vegetarians who will never eat meat, and then there are vegetarians who sometimes like to enjoy some pork in their cabbage soup. So this would be let's say an image of what manifesting Qingli would look like, that you are basically not a slave to any principle, and Qingli, of course, includes considerations based on emotions and situational particulars. So yes, this kind of, let's say, flexibility comes in as a necessary, as like an indispensable aspect of Confucius's teaching. And yes, and here, yeah, I'm thinking of whether we can take it even a little bit further and see irony as the verbal expression of some kind of reversal. I think this is, I think Professor Wang's, the passage Professor Wang used is also, I felt that we were somehow speaking about the same thing, about the Junzi being seen as a flatterer. So irony here maybe can be seen as the mirror of a reversed value system. The first line of the Analects: to learn and regularly apply what you have learned, isn't it a pleasure? To welcome friends from distant places, isn't it a joy? To stay undisturbed when people don't think highly of you, isn't that the mark of a decent person? So here we might say there is irony functions in this way, let's say pedagogically, as a method of instruction. It points to some situations which are conventionally taken to be good, like the situation where you are actually recognized by others. This is conventionally understood to be good. And here we have this reversal. That is, it is exactly that you are the Junzi, you are this decent person when you don't care about what most people care about. And when your focus is on the simple joys of having friends or having people with similar ideas as yours, right? People with who you share, let's say, a vision, or you share values. Isn't this a joy? So it is somehow questioning the conventional understandings of what joy is and what pleasure is. Because also the idea that you learn and regularly apply, of course, implies that what you learn, you're going to apply in your everyday life, and everyday life is full of problems and obstacles where you have to apply what you have learned. So as this kind of reversal, let's say. But I will stop here, and maybe I can go back to this some more passages, the irony of concepts, because yes, I'm already out of time. Yes, we can always go back.
Yeah, we can be flexible, but let's invite questions from the speakers first. Let's ask first Professor Ziporyn and the next Professor Wang. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Great, Dimitra. I really enjoyed that. I'm very interested in hearing more about, pushing further on this expanded notion of irony and particularly its relation to the reversal of values. And hopefully when we get to the more global conversation and look at a few more passages, I'd like to return to that. But specifically, I want to maybe ask you about the 无所取材 line. I think you said the reading where this becomes self-critical. So tell me if this makes any sense to you, and maybe can thicken the irony as we're understanding it in the Wei-yan of Confucius. Maybe it's more like Miao-yan, these are like witty, bon mots in a way. This one, I think, is because the cai, of course, would have, he's been talking about a raft, right? And it seems to me the only reason that the raft specifically is in the line, rather than just say, I want to go flow out to sea, is to set up this pun on cai, which we can compare to the pun on zhi that Huaiyu mentioned. So I would take it as, right, cai means raw material to make a raft with, and obviously also means talent, right? Somebody's talent. So we can say 无所取材 can mean, Zilu, you're braver than I am, but you're not the material to accomplish this living out, on the outside of society as my sort of aide de camp in this lone, creation of this alternate society, or just out of society. But it could be that about himself. In other words, not only, as you suggested, like 无所取材, meaning I didn't manage to change the world, but also I don't have what you have, the courage to leave it alone. And that's like a double irony. It's a little bit like the 知己不可而为之 kind of idea, right? That Confucius, in a certain way, and that's really a very thick irony there, right? So, I mean, 知己不可而为之, I know it's not him talking about himself, but it becomes a kind of authoritative statement that he knows it's hopeless, and he knows he can't really, he can't succeed in running away from it. He doesn't have that same courage. Now, but I think it's double-pronged, just like the 知在其中 is double-pronged, right? It both means, this is, I both grant that there's a kind of special virtue in what you're suggesting, if you took me seriously and we were to do that, and I could really do that. There's another kind of virtue, though, in my inability to do that. So, which I can describe equally as a failure or a success. It's like the 知己不可而为之 kind of thing. Like, this is a quixotic task, but the quixotic task is itself, it is admirable only insofar as it's acknowledged to be quixotic, right? It's admirable only if I realize that it's foolish, right? That it's unaccomplishable. Because then he is an exemplar. Then it really is like Analects 1:1, as you quoted, right? And the first one I'm going to talk about, I think, maybe picks up on this, right? I will fail, and I know I will fail, but the failure, and that would be just stupid if it weren't also the acknowledgement that I knew I was going to fail and yet kept trying anyway, because that serves as an example for others to continue to try that, let's say, in the future. So I don't, so there, and I think a lot of them in the Analects do that, and I don't know what to call that. I think it's some kind of irony. It's always this kind of splayed thing that cuts in several ways. It's a put down to Zilu, but it's also put down to him, but it's also praise for Zilu and also praise for himself, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but praise for him, Brook, for I wouldn't say praise because he will he recognizes the Quixotic Commission and the failure and so on, but praise because he doesn't give up. Basically, he doesn't
Right.
get on a raft to leave. Right.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly.
Stay.
His failure, his lack of courage is itself the virtue here, right?
Yes.
But that doesn't make it not a lack of courage, too. You know?
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
the double value system you're getting at in a way, right? Like you
Yes.
don't have to decide, it doesn't fall on one side or the other, and that's kind of the way-in of the way of the way-in, or the meow of those things, maybe. Something like that, maybe?
Yeah. Like I mean, that's the self-characterization, right? Like the one who
Yeah.
doesn't require whatever learning and teaching others, right? So it fits in with that.
Yeah. Okay, that was mainly what I wanted to ask about. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Professor Wang's question.
Okay, very nice. I think I learned a lot from your talk. The first question I have is that because you're in China, you were in China, in your Macau is part of China. You're talking a lot about Chinese scholars, and so I want to ask you how they or how you translate this irony in Chinese. So this is a very tricky question because you talk about the translation I grew up with, that the typical Chinese translation of irony is 讽刺. It's not wrong, but it's not 讽刺 is not wrong, but 讽刺 typically is not enough, because irony can mean much more than 讽刺. 讽刺 is and especially you have to take 讽刺not as the typical common everyday sense, but in the traditional Chinese sense, then that's more accurate. But could Huaiyu also be a translation of? Because Huaiyu itself is very ambiguous in classical Chinese. The way can mean so many things. Maybe Huaiyu could be a better translation of irony than 讽刺. I'm not sure, but that's something that we can think about. Yeah. Because Huaiyu is much more ambiguous and can mean surround about something, and so there's so many layers in that kind of Huaiyu thing. So, but yeah, I were trying to learn them from what you think about this. Yeah.
Yes, this is
I have a second thing.
Sorry.
If you want to say at once, or you can after. The other is the 520. And science, right? Three times and 2 times. Why that matter? 2 or 3. What's the difference, right? So, but I want to point to the direction that for Confucius, 2 times and 3 times is also a man. Maybe our appreciation also a man. So 2
Sorry.
times.
I didn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you repeat?
2 times and 3 times may be different in that they matters to the right character, and the character building has to be, you are not thinking too little, that you are rash, but you are not also not to think too much, so you become hesitating. So the right character is trying to find the balance between. So the irony is that. So that's the question. Do you think that I'm not quite sure yet, but do you think the right character should have irony? To what extent the irony should be in your character, right? And because 智者不惑, Confucius say that you should not be hesitating, you should not be puzzled. But irony involves some kind of not knowing exactly what to do is. So that I'm not sure. The 2 or 3 or maybe more. What's the position on that?
Yeah, but how to translate irony in Chinese? Yeah, this is a whole other discussion. Usually, I mean, the word 反字 or 防防 or 反语 is a little bit better. Like, I mean, in the Chinese context, Chinese scholars would, let's say, accept 反语 a little bit better. 防防 and 防字, it's not easy for Chinese scholars to accept, and I hear that. I mean, I can understand that, because it makes Confucius, as they tell me, it makes Confucius look like he's constantly mocking others or demeaning others, that he's somehow arrogant. So yeah, the easy way out of this problem is to, when I have to speak about Confucian irony in Chinese, to just say irony, to use the English word. This is more acceptable, actually. So yeah, this is about cultural self-understanding and intercultural understanding. But yeah, I mean, if I had to pick a word, I think I would prefer 反语. And with footnotes and explications. The second question was about Professor Wang. Your second question was about
the 520, right?
the 3 times and the 2 times.
Yes. And
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. This is like yeah. This is of course a very valid interpretation, that he is basically directing this remark specifically to Wenzi, because he thinks that he's basically praising him. Like, you don't have to think so much, because you already achieved, let's say, moral perfection. Or like you said, Professor Wang, like that don't think too much, because this is going to keep you from acting, basically. This is being too hesitant. Yes, and I mean, this is what I'm trying to say. If we can think, if we can think about it differently, as basically Confucius making a bigger claim, while making also maybe these claims, while making a very contextualized claim that has to do with this particular interlocutor, he's also making a claim about not taking yourself so serious, not being so sure and so confident about like you having figured it out somehow. 我有办法，上司而后行。That's my way, right? This is the way. So also being like open again, right? Being open to different situations that are going to shape how you think about your moral cultivation. So don't be so punctilious. Don't be so rigid about how things can work. There is not one formula there. So it's like it's a comment, an ironic comment, of course, because he's given a formula in the place of another formula, but he is saying that don't think in terms of formulas, basically. It's not a matter of 2 or 3. I'm telling you 2, but actually I mean the opposite. I mean that it's not a matter of 2 or 3. So I think, yeah, we could also look at it like that. And your last point was...
No, that's all. I only have 2. That's
yes, it. That was the, yes.
So I mean something about this. There's another dimension of 520, because I want to give some time for Greek. And because it may not, conviction may not be, you have to think twice or think. But maybe that's, I haven't achieved Wenzi. He is a character, maybe he's thinking. So for another person, he may be thinking that you may want to think. you don't have to say at the same time. Yeah, I want to, yeah, because we already a little over time. Yeah.
And yeah, I just wanted to sort of pile on a little on that, that I could. I mean, that one is traditionally read, and I think this is what Huaiyu was kind of saying, right? And you were seconding, right? It's a Zhongyong example, right? It's a guoyou buji, right? Going too far is as bad as not going too much, right? And that is we could say this is one of the key elements of whatever we're calling irony here in the Analects, which is to say, as you put it very nicely, Dimitra, that that any formula you give, if it just is purely that, right, it fails to do what it's supposed to do, and so it always has to have that little spot of the undermining on it inside it. I mean, that's what I was sort of saying about courage and continuing to try in the other example, right? Neither one of those is a pure virtue. It has to do with, so there is such a thing as excessive virtue, right, in a way. But in another way, you could say, well, Zhongyong itself is not excessive, but I think you nicely put it a moment ago. But even that, right, is just a way of saying, distance yourself from that first level of, absolute command so that they, each has a little taste of the other in it, right? And you posit a third one as if that solves the problem, but it's really the gesture of the undermining of the two that's being exemplified, and that's always, it's Shen Jiao, right? It's not the content of the teaching, it's his actual way of responding, which is to jump out of that dichotomy each time, right?
The embodied teaching, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sort of
And
the
also,
performance. Yeah.
it makes us think differently about what Confucius's so-called flexibility is. What is
Yes.
the flexibility, right? If flexibility is to be able to, let's say, apply a certain principle to your situation, then I think this is somehow not enough to describe, right? Going on here.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So there's something different going on with principles. These are different kinds of principles, we might say.
Exactly. And then we could start talking about the Zhou Yi, which Huaiyu is working on right now, and the way, rules of interpretation work in that context, I think this direction goes a long way.
Thank you, Dimitra, for your answers, and particularly intercultural and post-comparative approach in terms of irony, which I learned a lot from your previous talk in Shenzhen. That's why I'm involved here. But the time is short. We'd like to move on to the final speaker, Professor Brook Ziporyn. He is Michel Professor of Chinese Religion, Philosophy, and Comparative Thought. He received his BA in East Asian Languages and Civilization from the University of Chicago and his PhD from the University of Michigan. He is an author and translator of many books. His seventh book, Emptiness and Omnipresence, an essential introduction to Tiantai Buddhism, was published by Indiana University Press in 2016. His translation of the Tao Te Ching was published in 2023. He is currently working on a cross-cultural inquiry into the themes of death, time, and perception, as well as a book-length exposition of atheism as a form of religious and mystical experience in the intellectual histories of Europe, India, and China. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to also share my screen if I can. See, tell me if this works. Okay, that's not what we want, this one. And I tell you, I don't have a PowerPoint. I really just want, and we're sort of poking our way toward some of the bigger issues here. But I just wanted to sort of chat with Huaiyu and Dimitra and with everyone here about some examples of these interesting usages of language and responses on the part of Confucius in the Analects. I'm not sure if we want to call these irony or if these are sort of data that we can use to help expand what we mean by irony in this particular case, to the previous point. So the first one, so you guys can see that okay, right? My screen. So Shibu Wei Zheng, right? This is so basically somebody asked Confucius, why don't you get involved in politics? Why don't you do politics? Why don't you do some governing? He quotes the Shu Jing, right, about filial piety and friendship with brothers, and that this expands or extends into Zheng. So this is a straightforward, maybe what Dimitra was calling a verbal irony in a way, but it's a very scampish one, because he then says this is also called Zheng. Note that it's also, he's not denying the other kind of Zheng, governing is governing. Xi Qi Wei Wei Zheng, right? What do you mean by Zheng? Or what did he mean by Zheng? By governing. So, you know, take this in, right? I mean, he's basically saying not being in government is a form of being in government. And that's pretty ironic. One way of doing so, well, the way you interact with the people around you directly, right? A redefinition of Zheng happens here. And it can mean, you can interpret that to mean, there's no need for me to do Zheng in any other way. My failure to get into Zheng, right? The same issue that comes up in the Wu Suo Qu Cai passage, is here played sort of from another angle, where at least we can say a very unexpected turn comes, right? And the unexpectedness is encoded in the way the question is asked, right? It is assumed that this means a certain thing. We have a kind of meaning change which reverses it. There's the other example of this is 四海为兄弟, right? 四海之内皆兄弟, right? In that case, that's someone speaking to someone who says he doesn't have a brother, right? And he's told, no, everyone within the 4 Cs are brothers. Of course, in that case, he does have a brother. He's just disowned that brother for ethical reasons, right? So the meaning of brother, like the meaning of Zheng, are malleable in this way. And I think this should be borne in mind, by the way, probably related to the question of Wei Yan and irony is the question of Zhengming. Because these are pretty funny kinds of Zhengming, right? Right? To say, what do you mean by Zheng, government? It doesn't mean being involved in so-called government. It means something else, right? Or it can mean also something else. Another kind of these is this one's Ru Da Miao, Mei Shi Wen, right? Somebody says, who said that son of Zhou, of a man of Zhou, knows or understands ritual? When he enters the great temple, he asks about everything. Confucius heard it and he said, this is the ritual. So not knowing the ritual and knowing to ask about the ritual is the ritual, right? And so, his failure to know about the ritual is thereby, again, his exemplification of enacting his knowledge of ritual, you could say, right? Knowledge of ritual and non-knowledge of ritual are there confused or conflated or complicated in this way, right? You can say, and you will see commentators simply saying, well, it is an actual rule of the ritual to ask about things, but I think that's an after the ex post facto, after the fact explanation, probably based on this passage, and then retroactively encoded as if it were a rule he was following. It follows on some of the same points we've been making. But if you follow through on that structure, we might get close. I'm not sure how to do it exactly, but you might get close to what we're talking about when we talk about irony in the Analects, right? The sort of emptying out of a virtue as the exemplification of that very virtue, right? The non-governing as sort of the core of real governing, right? This isn't quite Wu Wei in the Taoist sense, right? Because look at that, there is a specific content to the non-governing here. It's not simply withdrawal, right? It's a concern with government. Just like this is not a total withdrawal from ritual, it's a constant concern with ritual, right? An interest in ritual, a quest about ritual, which is the ritual. Put it like that. This next one here is is really straightforward, but I think a good example of something we see a lot, right? It's kind of obvious, but the reason I wanted to bring this one out is because it's a rare example where you have Confucius actually asking to be interpreted. I always think these are very important moments to notice in text when you have the mysterious figure repeat his own words to someone and give his own explanation of it, right? This is a clue to us to how to read the text. So in this case, he is asked about filial piety, and he says, "Wu wei, do not disobey," right? Pancha leaves, and then Pancha is driving his chariot, and then Confucius out of nowhere tells him this story. Meng Sun asked me about Xiao, and what I said to him was Wu wei. He's really fishing in this case to be asked about how to interpret this, which tells us he knows he has given a deliberately mysterious or ambiguous answer, right? That is likely to be misconstrued, or which he wants his disciple to know this was said in a particular way to this person in a way that he could swallow it, but not quite necessarily get what I really meant. What does that mean? Because when you ask about filial piety and you say Wu wei, that could be taken to mean do not disobey your parents, right? But Confucius instead says, when they are alive, serve them with ritual. When they are dead, bury them with ritual and sacrifice to them with ritual, which means what the object of Wu wei is not the parents, but the li, right? And once again, I would say that in answering that way, but not giving the full explanation to that particular interlocutor, in other words, the deferential, or you could say the deferral or the postponement that Dimitra was talking about, is actually an exemplification of ritual, right? The way he spoke and what he did and did not say in that case was ritual. So his answer to his own disciple that spells that out, the implication being that Meng Sun had probably excessively buried his parents, given them too lavish of a funeral, right? So thinking that was very filial and thinking that he was obeying the wishes of them. But of course, the implication is that on the contrary, that was not in accordance with ritual and not obeying ritual. And yet, in not saying that directly, Confucius was showing ritual. And this is related to the next one, if I still have time. This one's really interesting. 非其贵而记之，常也, right? So, and then 见义不为，无勇也. Here too, I think the context would most likely be that somebody is sacrificing more than is expected of them. So they are giving more. It's a guoyu buji situation, which is itself an overstepping of ritual. So someone's giving an overly lavish sacrifice to a rank above someone other than their own ancestors, which involves being a claimant to being the legitimate successor to that spirit, right? So it's actually an act of hubris in a way, right? Of overweening pride. It's an overstepping of the line. But Confucius says, rather, 谄也, it is flattery. So, in other words, it is a humiliating, lick-spittle kind of bowing and scraping behavior to worship any ghost other than one's own. And I love that. Of course, the primary meaning of that, 非其贵, is most likely ancestor, right? 其贵. But it's a very pungent line, right? If worshiping any ghost other than one's own ghost, one's own dead, one's own death is just flattery. So sacrificing to heaven or to the great gods, as if to, sort of the more comprehensive principle, which you may think is a greater humility as you put yourself in the context of, the awesomeness of the highest power. On the contrary, for him is is flattery. And then similarly, Jenny Buwei Wu Yong Ye. I take it that means this looks like a brazen, brave act to do this, but is being redefined as a lack of courage. This overstepping, taking sort of more than belongs to one's own situation. I wanted to talk about a couple more of these if I have time. This Gong Yu Hu Yi Duan Si Hai Ye Yi. This one is a little bit going far afield because I really want to question all those here about the interpretation of this line. I'm aware that commentators for a long time have even adopted the term Yi Duan to mean something like what Buddhists mean when they say Wai Dao, right, or Xie Jiao, or alternate teachings, and that's certainly how Zhu Xi interprets it. But contemporaneously, I do not see any use of the term gong that does not mean attack in contemporaneous texts. If there are some that mean to work on or study, someone could correct me. But at the very least, 99%, including in the Analects, not to mention the Fei Gong chapters of the Mozi, etc., mean to attack. And so the obvious surface meaning of this is straightforwardly to attack the other end is indeed harmful. And the irony, if that's the right word for it, for that would be, is you attack something in the trying to harm it, trying to cause harm, right? Otherwise, why is hai even in here, right? It's because it's related conceptually to gong. You attack something because you want to do harm. And the miao yan, the wei yan here is to say, when you attack the other, it is indeed harmful, meaning it is harmful to oneself, because he's defining that other end. You know, you're on two ends of the same branch, as it were. So this is like your hand attacking your foot kind of story, right? To attack the foot will indeed be harmful to the hand. And I bring this up not only in the way we would interpret gong, but also in the way we interpret duan in the context of the Analects. And of course, there's this passage, wu you zhi hu zai, and this is very relevant again too. Wu zhi, right? Like the do I have li? Do I zhi li? No, I may sure when, right? If some ordinary person comes and asks something of me, kong kong ru ye. Now, interpreters will vary on whether that means him, the questioner, or me. In other words, not only I am wu zhi ye, right? I'm kong kong ru, but what I do know how to do is tap the two ends and exhaust it. And you know, as I was suggesting a moment ago, I think that's what we are seeing, again, almost as an explicit description of the method we're seeing exemplified often in the Analects, the guoyou buji type of method, where you find the end and you find the alternate end, just like zhi zai qi zhong yi, right? This guy's talking about it from this side. There's another side to it. This has to be just dian dao la, that ko, right? I just need to tap to indicate that, or wu suo qu cai is another example of touching the other end of the matter, rather than attacking.
Ziporyn,
Yes.
Can we shortly conclude?
My conclusion is, isn't that interesting? Let's discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. The time is a bit pressing, but
Sure.
I'd like to keep at least 10 minutes for the audience. So,
Yeah,
but let's start from
Wait,
Professor Wang's question.
let me unsave my screen. I mean, unshare my
Yes.
screen. There we go.
So Professor Wang.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll be quick. So, yeah, let me talk about the Sihai Ye. That passage. You talk so many passages there. Yeah, there's so many interesting points, but I cannot talk. Hopefully we have more time. But yeah, the irony is that I checked that passage before in the commentator before your talk, and the irony is that there are so many ways to read there's no way to know what the passage. For example, there's two ways of reading in the last text. One is to take it as no meaning, just saying that that's the no substantial meaning. But the another way of reading it, as offered by Zhao Xing, the famous. But he reading it slightly differently. So he read it in a way that it has a real meaning. Right?
Sorry,
So,
can you lean in a little, please? I missed the key word there. So, who read it?
Zhao Xing.
Okay.
He read it as to stop. So, the second part of the sentence can have completely opposite meanings.
Yeah.
If you read it as no meaning or to stop.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's also change how you read the first part, whether to read it to study or to attack. These are also opposite. So I leave it to you to see that you can have kind of your choice to how to interpret the passage when you choose different kind of layers of meanings in each kind of characters.
Yes.
And also, for time, I will take another one. 美诗问，孔子入太庙. It's also the way that how do you never know, you can never know just by reading the text. Yeah, it's always the context, or how do you read the person. And someone says that text means that how do you understand Confucius' position in that position? In the way that someone says that some scholars suggest that in that sentence, Confucius already know everything about the religion. So he's suggesting that even if I know everything, I should still ask. That's the ritual. that you never take for granted that what you know is the thing that you should know.
Right.
So I will stop here for time.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, of course, I totally agree. Right, that's another way. The Mei Shi Wen, right, can work that way, and that still kind of works for our purposes here. It's sort of right. Let's just say, even if he knows, he will ask, right? So whether or not he knows, he will ask, right? Doesn't necessarily imply that, but of course, pious commentators love to do that, even when Confucius says 无知, as he does in the other passage I quoted, right? They will say, well, he's just being humble there, right? That's just ritual. So we can do that for all of those disclaimers and make him a sage. But what I appreciated about both of your presentations, right, that's sort of, without necessarily discounting it, I think we can provide a strong alternative, right, and take him at face value when he says, I don't know, right? And I don't have the talent, and I'm not as brave as you, So, yeah. As for the gong, though, I still will insist that one linguistically, I just don't see any contemporaneous usage. That one seems like special pleading. But of course, the E, you're absolutely right. We can switch that around either way. Thanks.
And that, if I may, Takaharu, may I jump in here?
I think he's perhaps frozen, it looks like.
Yes, the internet's problem.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, I just wanted to say that this also compels us to read the San Yu Fan, right? If you don't give me the 3 corners back, right? I give you the one. So does he have all the corners, right? This is the question.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that a way to read it, if we follow this line of thinking, is that he doesn't. He genuinely doesn't have the other corners.
Right.
That only you have them in a certain way. And these are also the limits of the teaching. I think that irony is also about limitation, right? It's also about recognizing limits.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Brooke, I really like what you said about the hand attacking the foot kind of idea, which we might also think of it in a penmo kind of structure, right? And we can also think about Ren and Li in this kind of relationship, right? I mean, when you when Yan Hui asks what is Ren, and Kongzi says 客体复理, right? It's returning to Li. Somehow this has always puzzled me. How Ren is Li, right? Of course, it's a very long discussion in the tradition too, right? What's the actual relationship? But I think irony, like taking these concepts as ironic in the sense that they are I like the way you say this, that they are ambiguous identities, that the one is not conceivable, right, or practicable without the other, but not in the sense of like form and content kind of distinction, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's another great example, the Ren and Li and the Ben and Mo kind of thing. That Liang Duan, I mean, I'm just sort of groping for something, you know, a kind of structure that is being kind of explicitly invoked in that passage, especially, right? Not knowing, I'm going to get the two ends, tap on the two ends, right, and exhaust it. So, but anyway, we're hopefully circling around this some idea here that we'll close in on more.
Thank you. Dimitra, do you have your own question? I guess not just follow up.
Yeah, I mean, my question would be, yes, like if we can somehow, if we have come a little bit closer to how to define Confucian irony, like this very unique kind of irony, what would it be? Would it be like the irony of a kind of like of the whole discourse, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like what I said in the beginning, which is, can we call it an ironic discourse? Which is not ironic in the sense that it is somehow not reliable,
right? Or not serious, right?
Yeah, it is not like constantly like suspended.
Right.
It's not a suspended kind of response, right? But it is somehow, paradoxically at the same time creating meaning, creating value, and being recognized, but also suspended, also constantly like reformulated.
Sure. I mean, you know, this would be obviously really long discussion, but I think my first instinct on that is to sort of go in the direction we've just been going, which is to say, it's not a free floating irony that can just go anywhere, right? It has this zhong kind of structure, this centering structure, right? So, and you say Ren and Li, and you even think about all these pairs. It always works in liang duan, not just wu duan. It's not wu duan, it's liang duan irony, right? So, which means, you know, you can talk about balance and these sort of more, it's quite valid, I think, you know, more staid way of putting it. But that can be misleading when you say balance, because the way you see Confucius operating it in these examples we're talking about is this kind of flipping over to the other end, right? It's not just out of this into anything, because you think about like irony as it was used in like, you know, German Romanticism or something, where it's sort of like, it's kind of based on the Cartesian subject can negate anything, right? So I don't really commit to any proposition, and any proposition I make, I can always undermine. It has that slippery quality to it, but it's not, but when you undermine yi duan, there's a specific way it goes, which is the other duan, you know? And then you get a center that emerges from that, and then you might have to do the same thing again. And that's exactly how like the Zhou is structured, for example, you know? It's these kind of nested flipping things. And whenever, even for the Neo-Confucians, like with Zhu Xi or somebody, you know, Yeah, it's Renyi Li Zhi, right, or Ren Li Yi Zhi, right, form this kind of circle, and there's a tension between Ren and Yi even, right? There's like Chun and Qiu and Yuan, Heng, Li, Zhen, Yuan and Li, and so which are really opposed, and sometimes you see Juxi doing really funny flip-floppy things like with Ti and Yong, like, well, in this sense, this is Ti and this is Yong, but then in the other sense, this is Ti and this is Yong, and that goes for, there's a contrastive quality that is necessary, but ends up being, having a certain kind of normative structure, right? Even though it's a special kind, and that's, I guess, what we're trying to pinpoint. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting so far, and I think this is the time for the audience for about 15 minutes. So I'd like to suggest just raising hands by the function key or showing up by the video on. Does anyone try to speak? Okay, let's start from Esther.
I knew
Hi.
the first question.
Yeah, I was like sitting there lying in wait with the question. Actually, I really enjoyed the discussion of different translations of irony, just because in terms of trying to figure out, what Chinese versions of it might be, and Fanyu, which is a great word and not one that I know that well. But connecting with that, I was wondering about 1318, because I'm doing a larger project on 1318. And the sort of the sheep thief thing. And several of the sayings that Brook also raised about doing government and then being friends, being friends and brothers is a form of doing government. And I think even if there's irony going on here, I guess I wouldn't say that that's non-government. I think there's a through line with that and with 1318 about, and this is kind of a very earnest, like traditional way of interpreting it, I know, but that you start learning how to do government in the family, and then you grow out from it, and there can't be a contradiction between them, or there is not a contradiction between them. And I just wonder, so in terms of irony being a reversal or a kind of denial or something, it doesn't seem like it's that, right? It seems like he's kind of, it's an ironic rhetorical pose, but not necessarily an ironic in terms of reversal. Or I was just kind of suggest that, or what you would, or whether you disagree or something like that.
Can I respond to that? Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, that's about the continuity between, the practice in the home, and I mean that's another way to talk about how Confucian thinking works, I would say, right? It's very, very much developed in Mencius, and I think it's there in Confucius too, right? There's a sprout, there's a thing which can be sort of singled out, and the thing that looks like this, very different thing will grow into this other thing, right? So, but I think maybe the issue there is this is responding to a question which is assuming their difference, right? And I mean, that's also the kind of question that Mencius is responding to when he's responding to the Moists, when he says they have arben, they have two roots, right? So I mean, in a way, the assertion that they are in a continuity is a sort of polemical, ironical pushback against the idea that these apparently unrelated things, at least in the eyes of a Moist, right, or the questioner in that particular passage, are in fact intimately related, right? So, right, of course, you can read it in a straight line, and I think that's the thing. We got to keep both of those senses kind of balanced.
Yeah,
Thank you.
If I can add something,
Yes,
because
please.
you did mention 1318. I think the big irony here is that we need to be aware that in the classical kind of language and in the way that Confucius talk about it, there is no formal definition and formal boundary to anything that he talk about. And that's the irony here, is that when he talk about 为政, that actually he meant that everything you do is having to do with it. And so there's no formal kind of boundary that you can say this is the Zheng or this is not the Zheng. That's the difference between the Platonic approach that you have to that's defined a formal idea about it. But Confucius is the irony that there's itself is irony that there's no such formal boundary about things. And
I think that's a
So-
great comment. I just want to pile on one more remark about that. I mean, and the great thing about that is that remark is, on the one hand, saying there's no need for you to worry about being in government because you are anyway, right? So in a way, it's inescapable, but in a way, it's also something you don't even have to think about. You know, you don't even have to do any extra special thing to do it. So it's already an ironic idea that, you know, government is everything, right? It doesn't just mean, so you should always be doing government. You know, the thrust of that is precisely because you can't escape it. You could, whatever you're doing involves that dimension. So, you know.
Also,
Dimitra?
yes. Also, we can take this structure to Ren. Don't worry about disliking other people, because this is also part of being Ren, right? Brook, you have this passage, and it was one of the passages you chose. So Ren is I Ren, but it is also Nangu Ren, right? Yeah,
Currently a very controversial saying, because there's a lot of controversy about what Ren means.
yes,
Whether it might mean something like justice or something like that.
Yes, just following up on what Professor Wang said about the boundaries, that they are it's not that there are no boundaries, but these boundaries are somehow your responsibility in each situation, and that makes it harder than having, let's say, one formula that you have to live up to, right? Or having one principle you have to realize, you have to substantiate. That somehow makes it harder.
I liked you tying it into Chen, your sort of discussion about, using discretion and that kind of thing. Yeah, it's very interesting. Thank you.
Let's move on to the next question from Angela.
Okay, thank you for the inspiring discussion. Actually, my question is more detailed. I wonder, how can we interpret the Wu Wei? Is it means do not disobey the ritual, or it means do not disobey the willingness of our parents? Because I think this question can also be aligned with the relationship between Yuan and Li. If we obey Yuan, that means we should take others' feelings, advantages into consideration. And if we obey Li, that means we should really obey some rules. But in some situations, these two things may conflict with each other. Okay, thank you.
Who starts?
Thank you. Who was that question for? Was that?
Professor Brook mentioned this task.
Okay, about that passage away. Well, you know, I wouldn't take the Li there just to mean rules. You know, I mean, it goes back to some of the Chen stuff that just got brought up, you know. I mean, you can see it exemplified there. We tend to think that there is a set of rules that are being obeyed, but there's famously, there's a lot of wiggle room in determining what the exact requirements of ritual are. So there's this I won't rehearse through. I would just say Ren and Li sort of liang duan hua at a certain point and then are recombined, but I don't think they are that way in the Analects. So I wouldn't say sure to Wu Wei to your parents, I think would not be Ren. I think that would be just slavish obedience. Love is different from obedience, right? I mean, a feeling is a different thing from obedience. So I don't think it's a conflict between Ren and Li, honestly. I think that the context there is probably there was an overly lavish funeral for the parents, right? Which I don't think Confucius would consider Ren in that case, right? So anyway, that's my thought on it.
Thank you very much. If Dimitra and Professor Wang don't mind, let's move on to the next question from Lu Yao.
Oh, thank you. My question is kind of follow Professor Amarantidou's question about the definition of the RNA in Analects. Especially, I'm wondering the similarities and differences between the RNA in Confucius Analects and the Zhuangzi. If I remember right, Professor Ziporyn has also write something about the RNA in the Zhuangzi, like 5 dimensions or 5 steps. So yeah, my question is about how could we compare the RNA in the Zhuangzi and the RNA in the Analects? Thank you.
Okay. Who starts to speak?
That's a very big question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are different ways to think about comparing, depending how you want to understand the one is going to somehow affect how you're going to understand the other. So you somehow, the moment you speak about irony in the Analects, you are at the same time speaking about irony in the Zhuangzi, because Confucius is a central figure, or anyway, one of the central figures in the Zhuangzi, and he's being mocked, but he's also very much revered. So yes, how do you understand the connection? If we go into this kind of more, like I said in the beginning, more kind of corrosive irony, which somehow turns the whole discourse constantly upside down, then I think that certain pathways that connect the Zhuangzian discourse with the Confucian discourse become more visible, let's say. But yeah, I think it's if we take the irony in the Analects as a kind of what I said right in the beginning, as this pedagogical tool, as this indirect critique, if we take it more lightly, to put it like that, then it has, of course, it also has this kind of function in the Zhuangzi. You have this kind of function of irony in the Zhuangzi. But if you take it on a deeper level, then it becomes, it somehow comes into a conversation with the irony in the Zhuangzi, which is the irony of a position of no position somehow. Like being in politics is not being in politics. Knowingly is asking aboutly, not knowingly. Or respecting your parents, being qiao, is not, sometimes it is not taking care that they have enough food and drink, right? It's not necessarily that. So yes, that's my point. This is a very very deep and very far-reaching question.
Thank you very much. Let's finish with the final question from Joseph.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. Professor Brook, my question is directed towards you. Professor Ziporyn, my question is directed towards you. In the Mengyizi Wenxiao passage, the way commentators have traditionally seen this is as part of a historical discussion in some respect. It is an exact application of Weiyan in some way, and could be even seen as slightly ironic. Fanchi, the disciple in the passage, served Mengyizi, and Zhang Xuan, I think Wang Kan as well, and Xinbing all say that this was to deliver a political message, telling him, just as your father did, do not disobey Li. Traditionally, Mengyizi's father was someone who greatly respected Confucius and put him on his teaching career, and Mengyizi was his first student. Would this also be seen as a measure of irony then, that the words were not to be misconstrued, and so he had to basically reassert them?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Sure. Yeah, I think that adds an extra layer of texture there, right? That's that Fanchi is also very much implicated on both sides of that conversation, right? And it's sort of singled out, right? Because it is a very unusual instance where an insistence on, but I mean, it's still an exemplification of Lee that he doesn't say that directly to Mengzun, right? He said he will wait until he is, even though he knows that will be transmitted once there has been the second conversation, right? Or that, at least that's the best chance for it to be transmitted. So yeah, I think that's very helpful. Thank you. I agree.
I think this is the final. Do you want to say, Dimitra?
No, I'm fine.
I think this is the time. I wanted to question myself, but I'd like to suggest some new avenue to the irony in the Analect, because I found the different levels or layers, as you say, not just linguistic level, but I can see the ontological level of cosmic order or moral characters, but you can say also moral level. And I could say logical level about truth and falsity, and also pragmatic level of utility. And I think there are many kinds of levels to say about or suggest ironical statements. So I'd like to hand over to Professor D'Ambrosio to conclude.
Oh yeah, no, thank you everyone. I think that was great. Brooke, you didn't get as crazy as I hoped, but you were.
I'm losing it, I think.
Yeah, you were approaching it. You were approaching it. Yeah. So yeah, no, that was a great roundtable. That was exactly what we hoped for. So thanks everyone. I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you guys. Bye-bye.